Good morning, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. We're very honored to have you all here for a very important event and remarks on exactly what is happening in our politics today. Just before President Obama's second inauguration, the New Yorker's Andy Borowitz published this fitting satirical headline, quote, "Republicans accuse Obama of using position as president to lead country." And I think that just about sums up where we've been the last several years. We've had year after year in which Republican politics has been a contest for who can say no the fastest, the loudest, and the longest, with no regard for reason or the best interests of the country. We've seen that particularly over the last 24 hours in response to the Supreme Court. Truthfully, we've seen that the moment the American people elected Barack Obama, Republicans leaders have made it their mission to block everything, literally everything the president has proposed. They've misled the American people about his policies, and over the last year, we've seen incredibly heated rhetoric around the president and the country's future. Today, Donald Trump is the Republican Party's frontrunner, and people are surprised that hateful, divisive rhetoric over the last 7 years has contributed to a candidacy that mirrors all of those themes. We are particularly honored to have Senator Reid here to discuss those topics and many more. Senator Reid has been an incredible champion for the American people, fighting for America's middle class, working to help all Americans on almost every issue that I've worked on over the last several decades. Whether he's working to pass policies that help hardworking families achieve the American dream, fighting his heart out to keep immigrant families together, protecting our environment for future generations, he's been an incredible voice for all of us. So I'm really honored to have him here, talk about what's happening with the American electorate, what's happening to our politics, where the Republican Party is going, and what Democrats can do about it. Please join me in welcoming Senator Harry Reid.
Excuse me. Sorry, I was a little late. It was quite a bad accident a few blocks from here that held us up a little bit. Nira, I want to take just a minute and publicly acknowledge John Podesta. When John Podesta came to me with this idea, I frankly was underwhelmed. I couldn't believe that he could do what he said he was going to do. He was right, I was wrong, and I have such admiration for this man who could have gone out in the private sector and made a fortune, and that's not what he chose to do. And you're stepping into those big shoes. You've done an outstanding job, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. Many Americans are scratching their heads about Donald Trump. I know I have on more than one occasion. Most of us cannot fathom how he rose so far and so fast. His vile rhetoric is embarrassing. His proposals are dangerous. The Republican establishment acts bewildered, but they should not be bewildered. As much as they may try to distance themselves from Trump now, Republican leaders are responsible for his rise. For 8 years, they drained all the oxygen from the policy debate in this country by replacing thoughtful engagement with resentment and with hatred. We're seeing it right now with President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. A full month before they knew who the nominee would be, Republicans already pledged to block him or her and treat him or her like a piñata. This is exactly the kind of mindless behavior that has hollowed out our political debate and created the conditions for Trump to rise. Republicans leaders created the drought conditions. Donald Trump has simply struck the match. Republicans began charting the path to Donald Trump 8 years ago. Recall where our nation stood at the end of 2008. President Bush was on his way out of office after a failed presidency that left the nation teetering on the brink of disaster. President Obama came into office with a broad mandate, promising pragmatic, bipartisan solutions that our nation really needed. Republicans were looking to looking to their leaders to bring them together. Sadly, Republican leaders chose the opposite path. Instead of cooperating on common sense solutions to help the millions of Americans still suffering from the Great Recession, Republican leaders chose obstruction and scorched earth policies. The night of President Obama's first inauguration, a group of Republican congressmen, senators, and strategists met at a nearby restaurant to plot the party's opposition to the new administration. Those in attendance decided on a twofold mission. First, Republicans would do everything in their power to keep President Obama from being reelected. Second, they would prevent President Obama from achieving any of his legislative priorities. Republican leaders' rejection of President Obama's manifests itself in one big lie that they repeated different ways over and over and over again. This is the lie. The economic hardships Americans face could not be addressed by smart, targeted policy solutions if those solutions were proposed by Obama. Again and again, Republican leaders told Americans that any policy put forward by Democrats was nefarious, simply because it came from President Obama. We've seen this big lie resurface in the last 24 hours as President Obama nominated Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overwhelmingly needs someone, and the Senate, with a large vote, appointed him, selected him, confirmed him to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, the second highest court of the land. Did it in 1997. At that time, 32 Republicans voted to confirm him, including Republicans Coates, Cochran, Collins, Hatch, Inhofe, McCain, and Roberts. Here's what Senator Hatch said of Merrick Garland, and I quote, "I know Merrick Garland very well. He'll be very well supported by all sides, and the president knows that," close quote. And he said a lot more very complimentary things. Republicans are slamming the door on a good man they once embraced. Simply why? Because President Obama nominated him. That's how they've treated him over his entire presidency. They've done it for going on 7.5 years. It didn't matter where these ideas came from. It didn't even matter if they came from Republicans. Republican leaders repeated their big lie over and over in many different ways. They said, whatever President Obama proposes, even if it's a Republican idea, it cannot help you and will hurt you. Look at the Affordable Care Act. In 2009, 50 million Americans were suffering without health insurance. The centerpiece of the reform proposed by Democrats is the individual mandate. Where did that come from? From the Conservative Heritage Foundation. But as soon as President Obama proposed the individual mandate, it suddenly became socialism in their eyes. But it's not just the Affordable Care Act. Democrats propose one policy after another to address the economic hardships facing Americans. Many of these ideas originated with Republicans, and nearly all of them had previously enjoyed bipartisan support. Yet one by one, they were rejected by Republican leaders who repeated the big lie: if Obama supports it, it won't help you. The list is long, very long. Stimulus, middle-class tax cuts, unemployment insurance, Wall Street reform, infrastructure investment. On issue after issue, Republican leaders faced a choice: help their constituents put food on the table, literally, or stick it to President Obama. Time after time, Republicans chose to stick it to President Obama instead of helping their own constituents. The examples continue: payroll tax cuts, mortgage refinancing, student loans, immigration reform, automobile bailout. All these policies used to enjoy bipartisan support. And all these policies would help the very people suffering most from the recession. But Republican leaders kept repeating their big lie: if President Obama supports it, it won't help you. Like any lie, maintaining this one took Republicans deeper and deeper into dishonesty. Republicans soon found that propping up the lie meant they had to question any independent authority that might contradict it. So they started routinely questioning science, statistics, or any other independent research that supported Democratic policies. The perfect example: climate change. In the face of scientific consensus, actually worldwide, Republicans say they don't believe the science. Preventing gun violence is another example. In the wake of an epidemic of mass shootings, Republicans reject common sense solutions like background checks. Instead, Republicans claim that more guns are the answer. Republican leaders have even put objective facts about the basic state of the economy in dispute. A recent poll showed that 53% of Republicans think the unemployment rate is higher now than when President Obama took office. This statistic is sad, it's wrong, but not shocking. Despite 72 consecutive months of private sector job growth and an unemployment rate below 5%, Republicans are still telling millions of Americans that President Obama has been a disaster for the economy. One after another, common sense facts and respected authorities were mowed down by Republican leaders, tossed aside as collateral damage to their one big lie. It's no wonder millions of Americans feel powerless. Republicans spent 8 years torching the institutions Americans once relied on to help them face the challenges of their daily lives. Instead of engaging on policy, Republicans simply told Americans there was nothing to be done. So what thrived in the wasteland Republican leaders created? Resentment, hatred, which Republican leaders were all too eager to embrace and too cowardly to renounce. Radical groups like the Tea Party flourished with dark money from the Koch brothers. The ideologies and objectives of these far-right groups varied, but they all had one thing in common: a searing hatred of President Obama, whom they considered an illegitimate president. It was obvious to even the most casual observer that the Tea Party wave was driven forward by some of the darkest forces in our culture. But instead of renouncing it, Republican leaders tried to co-opt it. This resentment and hatred took three main forms. First, rendering President Obama illegitimate. Second, fear-mongering against Muslims. Third, sowing hatred against Latinos. These forces, which are all now synonymous with David Trump's candidacy, were incubated by Republican leaders for the past 8 years. The most recognizable attempt to declare President Obama as illegitimate is the birther movement. It all started when a website called WorldNet Daily asked, "Where's the birth certificate?" Before long, more and more conservative media outlets were discussing this absurd conspiracy theory. Republicans in Congress did nothing to quell the blatant lie. Nothing. Republicans in the House introduced legislation suggesting that our president wasn't born in America. And who was the most prominent American to give the birther movement a platform? Yeah, Donald Trump. I find it ironic that Mitt Romney is now speaking out against Donald Trump and his extremism. Romney knew how ridiculous the birther claims were, and yet, what did Mr. Romney do? He asked for Trump's endorsement. Mitt Romney helped fan the flames of resentment. However, a more insidious but less obvious attempt to render President Obama illegitimate was being waged by my counterpart, Mitch McConnell. As was reported in the New York Times almost 6 years ago, and here's what it said. Before the health care fight, before the economic stimulus package, before President Obama even took office, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader, had a strategy for his party: use his extensive knowledge of Senate procedure to slow things down, take advantage of the difficulties Democrats would have in governing, and deny Democrats any Republican support on big legislation. That's from the New York Times. No president in history faced the number of filibusters President Obama has faced. To date, Senator McConnell has led Republicans in waging more than 500 filibusters, despite the fact many of these filibusters were launched against things they thought were a good idea. During the first 6 years the only 6 years that LBJ served as majority leader, he had to overcome one or two. My 6 years, in the hundreds. It got worse after my first 6 years. The only possible message such unprecedented and blind opposition could send is that this president and his ideas are illegitimate. Indeed, Senator McConnell's blind rejection of any policy proposed by President Obama, regardless of merits, is the kinder, gentler version of birtherism. Donald Trump's style of no-holds-barred politics was forged in the Senate Republican caucus. We're seeing this play out now before our very eyes in the debate over the Supreme Court. Moments after Justice Scalia's death, the Republican leader decided to abandon the Constitution and any degree of bipartisanship to appease his radical base. That night, Donald Trump followed the Mitch McConnell playbook and said Republicans must delay, delay, delay. They didn't know who the nominee would be. Merrick Garland's name hadn't been mentioned. Yet Republicans were already resolved to undermine President Obama again. The sort of punch first, ask questions later leadership is exactly what we've come to expect from Donald Trump. We know where he learned it. If Senator McConnell wonders from where Donald Trump came, he should take a look in the mirror. No one is working harder to support Trump than Mitch McConnell. McConnell's sacrificing the Republican majority to allow Donald Trump to pick the nominee. The Republican Party's anti-Muslim movement is another force that spawned Donald Trump. Before he was elected, conservative outlets like Fox News began their efforts to convince Republicans that President Obama was a secret Muslim. Well-funded conservative groups engaged in a concerted effort to stoke the flames of hatred. Some speculated that members of the Muslim Brotherhood were working in the Obama administration. Others suggested that Sharia law was taking over America. Once again, Republican leaders did nothing to responsibly address the anti-Muslim hate coming from their party. Now, because of their inaction, they sowed. They're reaping Donald Trump's candidacy, a candidate who openly spouts anti-Muslim hate speech and wants to block all Muslims from entering our country. The third force, the Republican Party's anti-Latino, anti-immigrant underbelly is the most salient example of how Republicans abandoned their thoughtful policy for fear and resentment politics. It's also a defining issue for Donald Trump. The Republican establishment has allowed decades of anti-Latino movement to fester within its ranks. Republican leaders looked on approvingly while extremists like Congressman Steve King used repugnant language against Latinos, such as dreamers were drug mules. Republican leaders said nothing as Mitt Romney urged a policy of self-deportation, as Jeb Bush spoke of anchor babies, and Marco Rubio called for deporting all dreamers. Now Republican leaders say nothing as Donald Trump and Ted Cruz say they want to round up, detain, and deport 11 million immigrants with a militaristic, massive deportation force. Together with well-organized anti-immigrant groups, Republicans have pushed through hateful legislation that allowed for warrantless arrests that made it a crime for Latinos to walk outside without their immigration papers. Instead of stamping out this hatred, Republican leaders adopted these positions as part of their platform. Republicans countered Republican hate with substantive policy. In the Senate, Democrats worked with a handful of Republicans to craft a good, comprehensive immigration reform bill. But then we watched as Speaker Boehner capitulated to Tea Party radicals and refused to even allow a vote. To this day, I've said a lot of times, I'm certain that if Speaker Boehner had given the Senate bill a vote, it would have passed overwhelmingly. To his credit, President Obama saw Republicans' inertia on immigration reform and countered it with a series of executive actions, and I appreciate it. The Republican response was both alarming and disappointingly predictable. Ted Cruz and others tried to force a shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. Came within minutes of that. All the time, Donald Trump was watching. He saw rampant extremism condoned by Republican leaders who were either too cowardly or too powerless to do anything about it. So when Trump calls immigrants rapists and murderers, he's just doing what he learned from generations of conservatives. The Republican Party has become, without question, the party of Trump. The question before us now is this: what does Trump's rise say about the state of the public policy debate, and how should America respond? For conservatives, the answer is simple. Their leaders must withdraw their support of Donald Trump and do it now. Now. For too long, Senator McConnell and Speaker Ryan have tried to have it both ways, giving Trump occasionally a slap on the wrist each time he says something detestable, but always committing to support him at the end of the day. This is precisely the kind of moral cowardice that enabled the rise of Trump. After years of refusing to announce birtherism, McConnell and Ryan are now supporting the most prominent birther in the nation. Why are they waiting to withdraw their support? What more do they need to see? Trump has made disgusting, sexist statements. He's insulted veterans, immigrants, and people with disabilities. Americans are being assaulted and taunted at his racial slurs at his rallies. Violence is being threatened and committed against African Americans with disturbing regularity, and Trump encourages it all. There's no gray area here. It's time for Senator McConnell and Speaker Ryan to find the backbone to say, enough, Trump, enough. If McConnell and Ryan think that Donald Trump's racist, xenophobic demagoguery is wrong, they shouldn't support him, period. If they refuse to revoke their support for Trump, they should put on Make America Great Again hats and stand behind Trump at his next press conference, be a mini Christie, I guess. Clearly, the nation cannot rely on conservatives to respond responsibly to Donald Trump. So how should progressives respond? We should double down on our ideas. To rectify the damage Trump is doing to the policy debate, we must challenge him boldly with the strength of our ideas, and we should do it now. We must continue to be the agents of change. We should remember that Republicans' big lie is just that, a big lie. And the truth is, progressive policy solutions can and will help all Americans, including those hit hardest by the economic pain and dislocation caused by the Great Recession. Requiring employees to offer paid sick leave will help millions of working families and make our businesses stronger. Making college more affordable will offer ladders of opportunity to Americans who now see only stagnation. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour will put more money in the pockets of workers and stimulate the economy. Fixing our nation's roads and bridges will create jobs. Studies have shown that for every $1 billion we invest in our infrastructure, 47 high-paying jobs are created, and other low-paying jobs spin off from that. Ensuring American women are being fairly compensated in the workplace, receiving equal pay for the work that men do. If they do the work that men do, they should get paid the same. We must restore Americans' faith in the democratic process. We can do that by fighting for a Supreme Court that will overturn Citizens United and get the dark money out of our political system. It also means taking a hard look at our government and doing whatever we can to ensure that it is as effective and dynamic as possible. Where there's gridlock, we should break it. This is what Democrats did with the nuclear option, when we broke a logjam of historic proportions and enabled the confirmation of 96 judicial nominees, leaving judicial emergencies across the country. They wanted to get rid of the NLRB. The NLRB is still there because of changing the rule. Our guiding principle should be responding to the needs of hardworking Americans. If our government institutions have outgrown certain norms and traditions, we should evolve to meet the needs of the modern era. We need to inspire a new generation of Americans to get involved with public service. We can only affect the best people by showing we're committed to new ideas and delivering real results for real people. But most of all, we should resist the urge to water down or run away from our policy solutions. We should resist the urge to move to the right. A few months ago, I met with the new governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards. I asked the governor-elect a few questions. One, I asked him about how he survived down there. He said, when people ask me if I supported Obamacare, I just said yes. He added, if you're a progressive and you dither over your principles, then, and this is a direct quote from him, people don't just think you're a liberal, they think you're a liar. So let's be proud of who we are. That's what this says to me. And let's not be shy about what we've accomplished. Democratic policies of the last 7 years have created 14 million jobs, dropped unemployment to less than 5%, and helped 20 million Americans gain health care. Not bad. Today, there are more jobs in clean energy than there are jobs in the coal mines. Meanwhile, Trump says he wants to make America great again. Which America does he want to take us back to? The time before African Americans obtained civil rights, or before women had the right to vote, or before child labor laws? Maybe Trump wants to go back to the time before Medicare, or before Social Security, or before the National Labor Relations Act, or before the Clean Air Act. We have only one America, and it's already great. But unlike Trump, we know what needs to be done to make America even greater. If we meet Trump's anger with our ideas, we will win. The power of ideals will trump Trump.
Thank you so much for those remarks on a whole range of topics. I really want to, I'll ask a few questions and we'll have time for questions from the audience. Thank you again for being here at Cap Action.
We have a lot of time. We do nothing in the Senate, so let's do.
I wanted to ask you one particular question about the Supreme Court nomination process. Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, said yesterday, I believe yesterday or this morning, that he just wants to let the public decide about the confirmation of the justice. What is your response to
Well, I'm
that
reaching
issue?
into my hip pocket here. Here's what he said yesterday. This is a quote. This is what it's all about. The reporter said, if your goal is to allow the people to have input into the Supreme Court nomination, why not hold hearings on Garland to highlight salient issues? Here is what he said. Yeah, that's not the goal. The goal is to let the American people pick the next president who will make the decision. So that's what this is all about to them, I guess, is about the presidential election. It's obvious that we've done this since 1900. We have picked 6 Supreme Court justices in the lame duck session of a presidency. This is to have this country wait for 18 months or so and leave the court locked at a 4-4 tie is so unfair to the country, but also the litigants. To get to the Supreme Court, some of these people waited decades to get there, and now they'll have to wait another few decades because their case will have to work their way up through the system again. It's awful what they've done.
We did a report this week that showed literally tens of millions of Americans would be affected by the court being stuck for so long, from immigration cases to women's health cases, or really voting rights cases. It's really not just a handful of people and the litigants. It has impact on everyone. Just to follow up on that, where do you see the debate going on the Supreme Court? We have heard that some Republican senators will actually meet with the nominee. It seems ridiculous that that's a breakthrough, but nevertheless it is. How do you see this debate playing out? And just to follow up also, you said in your remarks that McConnell was really threatening his majority, in order to take this intransigent position. Why do you think he's doing what he's doing?
I think that the Republicans are doing this, led by McConnell, to satisfy these very loud, rich, right-wing people. I mean, I think that that's what they want to do. This is a big issue with them, and I think well, time will only tell, but I can't imagine how this is going to help the Republicans who are running for the Senate to have the gall for a straight face to say we refuse to meet with this person no matter who it is. We're not going to hold hearings. We're not going to have a vote. I mean, I just, it's hard for me. I don't know who came up with this, and they did it quickly. I mean, Scalia had just died. I mean, within hours.
What impact do you see a Trump nomination, which seems increasingly likely, to have on the Senate landscape?
Well, my staff told me not to say this, but I can't resist.
I've been there.
You know, he may be right about the Mexicans building a wall and paying for it themselves, because if he's elected, they'll build one to keep us from going into Mexico.
I hear you.
They'll be happy to do that.
Do you see him having a particular impact in the Senate races?
I don't know how anyone, some of these people that are running for re-election, Rob Portman, Roy Blunt, I just don't know how these people could run and say, well, I'm supporting this guy for president. He can't run, and he can't run away from it. He's the nominee. I don't know if they get much better with Cruz, but.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, you do obviously your remarks focused on Donald Trump, but what are your thoughts on Ted Cruz? I mean,
well, here's what I've said about Ted Cruz. as I've been in public service, Jim DeMint, I disagreed with him on everything politically. But I always appreciated Jim DeMint, who not hiding who he was. He told everybody how he felt. It was no surprise. He wrote a book, talked about what he wanted to be. And I have to say this about Cruz. He at least has some principles. I don't like what he stands for, but he stands for something. Very little of which I'm finding yet I agree with. But I'm not as turned off by Cruz because he at least stands for things. Trump stands for nothing, and that's why I was so upset for Rubio. He didn't stand for anything.
I think you really lay out the level of obstruction and the connection between the obstruction and the rise of Trump. Do you expect that they're Republicans? Do you hear of any Republicans who are kind of reevaluating the stance they've taken? Is there a chance that if past November, if Democrats win the White House and take the Senate, we could see some reevaluation of this? Because it has really led to odd results.
I see people writing books about who've been members of the Senate and leadership. Talk about the things that could be done to correct the Senate. I had a nice conversation with Tom Daschle this week. Tom has a recent leader, but he has no idea what's happened since he left. He has no idea. This is unbelievable. I said, and it's true, they filibustered motion to proceed to things they wanted to get done, just to stall for time. And each filibuster takes a long time. You have to file it 2 days, and then you have to have a vote, and then you have a vote, and then you 30 hours wasted, and then you're only on the legislation then, and then you have to get off of it. You need to file cloture again, 2 more days, a vote, 30 more hours. I mean, it's just unbelievable the time that we have wasted. Yeah. So people do not understand the ends to which they've gone to stop Obama from effectuating progress for our country.
But, I appreciate they can't say any of these things publicly, but do you think if you have a Trump candidacy that is very ineffective in the fall campaigns, do you think we could get that we might have the hope that we could return to a period of even in 15 years ago, where 10 years ago, 9 years ago, where there was filibusters occasionally, but not the unprecedented filibusters we're dealing with now?
I look back with nostalgia to having worked with Trent Lott. Mm-hmm. He was extremely conservative, but pragmatic. He knew things had to happen for the country. Bill Frist, who was not an experienced, he was the only leader I know of is chosen by a president rather than by the caucus, but he was a super nice guy, and he wanted to do the right thing for the country. I lament not having people I can work with in that regard. I don't dislike Mitch McConnell. I don't, I have no hatred in my whole body for Mitch McConnell. I'm just terribly, terribly aware of what, as I've tried to outline in these remarks I made today, what he has been a part of to allow people like Trump to be around. And because of what they've done, there's tremendous concern by the American people. They think the system's broken. If it continues like this, it is broken. So I have hope that the next Congress can be better. But it will only come about if there's a return to collegiality and people being ladies and, as we say in the House, gentle ladies, so that we can get things done. Right now, Republicans have chosen the path of getting nothing done, and that can't continue, or the Senate's going to change remarkably.
Do you think there's a place for moderates in the Republican Party today?
Well, they've primaried a lot of them,
yeah.
And the moderates we used to go to, but the moderates. We did tree planting yesterday for the 100th birthday of Ed Roybal, and he came to Tip O'Neill. He'd been in the Senate House quite a long time. He said to Tip O'Neill, I'm going to start a Hispanic caucus. And Tip said to him, where are you going to meet, in a phone booth? Well, that's what I say about the moderates in the Senate. Where are they going to meet, in a phone booth? And it better be a small phone booth, because they don't have anybody to fill it right now. You know, when the reason we were able to get a few things done with all their obstruction in the first Congress of, I say a few things, we got a lot done. It was the most
Very productive
the
Congress.
first Congress of Obama, more so than the Roosevelt. It was the best ever. And the reason we did that is we had people to work with. We had Susan Collins, we had Olympia Snow, we had Arnold Specter. Those were the three suspects we used most all the time, because we had 57, 58, 59 for a short term. Short time we had 60, but Kennedy was sick, as we learned later. So that's how we were able to get things done. The moderates then were more than they are now. I only named 3 of them, but right now you have to search hard. You got Susan Collins, and I don't know who else you would say is a moderate.
Great. Thank you so much for your comments. I think we have time for questions. If you would just identify yourself as you go, and we'll give you the mic right there.
After they once identify themselves, can we reject the question?
You know, I've been with you a few times, so I know you'll do whatever you want.
Hi, Senator Alex Bolton with the Hill newspaper. In 2013, you triggered the nuclear option. You broke the logjam that was for the appellate courts, but you didn't trigger the nuclear option for the Supreme Court. There's still a filibuster for the Supreme Court nominee. Do you regret not doing that for the Supreme Court as well? And going forward, seeing that there's a new precedent being set for how Supreme Court nominees are being treated, looks like there's going to be a higher bar. Do you think that perhaps the nuclear option or a change of rules should be considered for future Supreme Court nominees?
I did that on purpose. I looked back at my experience. For example, Clarence Thomas. If you look back, he a lot of support for him. And I decided, tell you the whole story, I'll be quick as I can. I called home, see how the kids were doing, talked to my wife. It was 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And I said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to go vote on somebody I don't want to vote for. She said to me, well, why are you going to vote for him then? I thought to myself, you know, she's right. Why should I vote for Clarence Thomas? I'm going to go vote for him. I was called Senator Bryan, my counterpart from Nevada, and I said, Richard, I'm not going to vote for Thomas. He said, come on over and we'll talk. So we both didn't vote for him. Thomas got 52 votes. There was not a suggestion, a whisper in our caucus that we would vote against him. Now remember, if you look at, we have people who, him as an example, who didn't get majority votes in the Judiciary Committee. We still brought him to the floor. Same with Bork. He didn't get votes in the committee, but we brought him to the floor. And I saved the supermajority for Supreme Court on purpose, because we kind of return to those days where we do what's the right thing. Or would we have been a better country? I shouldn't answer my own question if we had filibustered Thomas, but the decision was made not to, and at the time it was the right thing to do.
Hi, I'm Jeff Koss with Greenwire. Senator Reid, you've said repeatedly that you think Senator McConnell is going to cave on the Supreme Court. Several Republican senators yesterday, including Senator Hatch, said they would be open to considering the nomination after the election in the event that a Democrat wins. Do you think is that the most likely option for this caving?
Well, you can describe the caving in any way we feel appropriate. You have your way. Here's how I feel about it. The caving's already started. Now, this may not sound like a great breakthrough, but we have a significant number of Republican senators said they'll meet with him. Now, maybe they will be browbeaten by the leadership of the Senate and they'll back off, but I think that's a breakthrough. You can imagine it's a breakthrough that they will sit down and talk to this good man, but that's a breakthrough. Now, I don't think that we should cut any slack to anybody saying, well, let's wait till the lame duck to do it. I don't agree with that. I think we should do it now. It is unfair to have this man treated differently than anybody else. Let's have the hearing. Let's have him come to the Senate floor. Let's have a debate the American people can watch in the committee and on the floor.
Is it possible, though, that he could be confirmed in that lame duck?
If possible, of course it's possible, sure. But that isn't I think it doesn't set a good precedent for the country that we run from a Supreme Court nominee.
Can we go over there?
Hi, Richard Pearson. I'm a federal employee. Everybody keeps talking about
Where do you work?
the Federal Labor Relations Authority.
Well, that's the end of his job. No, I'm only kidding.
Everybody talks about the court, the seat being vacant for a year. If
It actually be more than that.
right,
but
if
go
the
ahead.
Republicans go ahead with their threat. But the reality is that would mean that the new president would be coming in, who will have hundreds and hundreds of cabinet appointments and sub-cabinet appointments to make. And every time a new president comes in, there's a huge backlog of these appointments. If you add a Supreme Court nominee on top of all that, it could easily go a year and a half or 2 years, or block nominations of other cabinet appointments.
Your experience working in the federal bureaucracy is very important to this issue we have before us. Another thing that's happened these past 8 years is we've had scores and scores of nominations have been held up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to comprehend. Ambassadors, they even held up the Foreign Service officers, the most non-political people in the world. And all we had to do under the statute is to approve their pay raise. Now these are people that work in some of the most remote, difficult places in the world, and they held up their pay raises. So I say to this man that he's absolutely right. We already have so many people that should be working with in the federal government that aren't. A lot of them quit and go back to their regular jobs. So your point is very well taken.
Good morning, Senator Reid. My name is Jeff Krasny. I'm with Ivy Capital.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I'm with Ivy Capital. Last week, there was a press conference with the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Trudeau. And President Obama at that point said, was talking about negotiations. And he said at times, you only get about 60% of what you like. And if you get 60% of what you like, you sort of hold your nose, but the other party holds their nose as well. But you get a negotiation out of it. So I'm kind of curious, rather than creating this adversarial type of approach, if you could somehow take a step, be magnanimous, go take that, cross the Rubicon in some respects by having an issue that, let's say, the Leader McConnell specifically wants, and negotiate with him with respect to that particular issue, such as, standing back from Guantanamo Bay, for instance. Giving that particular issue, let's say, to him, with respect to the agreement that the Supreme Court.
So here's the problem we have. And I don't mean this in a negative sense, but kind of living in the past. That's the way we used to do things. You know, my first 30 years here in Congress, that's how we did things. Legislation is the art of compromise. I've been fortunate to get a number of things that's now the law. But I never got what I wanted. We always had to change things, compromise things. And that's the way the legislative process works. The problem is we have nobody to negotiate with. I didn't say it to be funny or throw away a line. They filibustered things they wanted.
I mean, I
Eat
think
up time.
exactly. I think something we've worked on here a great deal, infrastructure. You know, we had 100 Republicans supporting an infrastructure bill in 2007, And then 2008, 2009, presidents elected, we couldn't get that same precise bill passed again. And all that had changed is that we had a different president.
I mean, the things we've done, for example, we lost 1 million teachers, police officers, and firefighters, 1 million, during the first year of the meltdown. So an amendment was offered on the Senate floor saying, let's get all those people back. It'd be great for the economy, but good for the safety of this country. And here's how we're going to pay for it. Anyone that makes more than $1 million a year, they will pay excess tax of 0.2%. The rich people didn't care. They would have been happy to do that. Every Republican voted against that. Every Republican. And this was clearly helped their constituents. You know, I have been branded lately, being, you know, as a guy who's mean to the Republicans. You know, I ran the floor for 6 years for Daschle. I did the floor. He did the political stuff. I did the floor. And that's where I got to know Trent Lott so well. And I was on the floor from the moment the Senate came in till left. And I took care of the Republicans. I would make sure if there was a unanimous consent request, the Democrats got something, the Republicans got something. And I was well liked by the Republicans because I protected them. But there's no one to work with anymore. They're afraid. They're afraid. I mean, look, what they'll do is the Democrat and Republican will introduce a bill knowing it's going to go nowhere. So they can issue a press release at home.
One last question.
Senator Alice Olstein with Think Progress. I wanted to see, how concerned are you that Democratic turnout in the presidential primary has been lower than Republican turnout? I mean, you talked about doubling down on ideas, but how does that translate into votes?
It's something we can't ignore. It's something that has, but most pundits and political scientists believe that the massive turnouts have been as a result of the rivalry within the Republican Party. With the Democrats, we've had this thing going with Hillary and Bernie for a long time, but it was kind of a love fest. You know, they wouldn't criticize each other. The last month or so, they've had a little negative stuff back and forth. So there was just simply not as much interest in the Democrats as Republicans. So I think that Donald Trump has brought people out who had never voted before. And I think that, you know, I think that this is something that should be a concern to the American people.
Thank you so much for your remarks today. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking questions. We're really grateful for all you do every day on the issues that matter so much to progressives, but all Americans.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.